What?
Hey guys, so it seems like the Iranian regime might fall. I'm not sure whether or not that's true. I haven't been paying too much attention to it, but it's an interesting idea anyways. If you're not aware, the Iranian regime originally came into power during the Carter administration. Now, Carter is often been described as a good man but a terrible president. Now, if you ask Razor Fist, he was a terrible man and a terrible president. Now, again, I don't really have too much of an opinion on it, but from what I understand is Carter, one of the good things that he did according to Styx Hexenhammer is that he had tried to wipe out one of the worst parasites known to man. And they have damn near succeeded in completely wiping out the disease. Now, the way the Iranian regime took place is that they kidnapped a vast number of American citizens. And the news media reported every single day how long it had been since the captives had been taken in the first place. Now, the hostage situation lasted years, and the Iranian regime held it over their heads, held it over Carter's head and over the heads of the Americans. Basically, like thumbing their nose at us the entire time. And what ended up happening is that eventually the Iranian regime, which was a highly Islamic form of government that basically wanted to issue Sharia law across the country, eventually decided that Carter would not be allowed to have any negotiations whatsoever because he was too weak. They were able to just completely ignore him. So they waited for a new president to come in, hoping that Carter's entire career would be completely destroyed. And they only started to negotiate when Ronald Reagan seemed poised to actually win the election. Now, some people accuse Reagan of actually coordinating with the Iranian regime to gain power, which, as far as I'm concerned, is far from the truth. The Iranian regime only started to negotiate when they had a more powerful president, a president that wasn't willing to let it come into power. And they knew that if they negotiated with Reagan, it would make Reagan look both weaker and stronger. And when I say weaker, I mean it would make it seem like Reagan was under the power of the Iranians. And therefore it would hurt his image that he seemed to have made a deal with them so quickly after he got elected. But at the same time, that for other people who would see it a completely different way, Reagan would be seen as a more powerful president because he forced the issue so completely and so quickly after being elected. Now again, I don't believe that Reagan had any ulterior motives, or that he was, negotiating under the table with the Iranian regime, or that he started negotiating with them before he actually took power. But what it certainly did do is it made Carter look extremely weak, that he couldn't do anything about the Iranians, and it destroyed his career. In fact, Carter was almost as weak a president as Joe Biden. The difference between Joe Biden and Carter is that the news media refused to report on the hostage situation in Palestine like they did decades ago during the administration of Carter. And I have a bit of a conspiracy about that, but it's not really that much of a conspiracy as it is just completely obvious. The news media knew that Carter's career was destroyed because they continuously reported on his failure to end the hostage situation and bring it to a resolution. And they knew that if they did it again with Biden, that Biden's entire career would also be destroyed, and that since the main opponent for Biden was Trump, that, well, all they would be doing by criticizing Biden would be allow Trump to get back into power. Now, it didn't help the media whatsoever to accomplish their goal. Trump got back into power anyways. The people who did report on the the Palestinian hostage situation were sort of Fox, but especially Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck being an old Fox contributor who, well, he ended up leaving the network or being fired from the network long ago, and then he set up his own independent news company. That ended up, well, it does pretty well for itself. Stick, Sex, and Hammer really doesn't like Glenn Beck and says he's like too boring. And as far as I'm concerned, Glenn Beck is a pretty interesting guy and a guy worth listening to. Especially since he's kind of a religious dude. And, you know, Sticks had that whole controversy where he was cheating on his wife and like groping his new girlfriend on a live stream. Kinda, if Sticks doesn't like you, it may not actually be that much of a bad thing. Anyways, ignoring that, before the overthrow of the Iranian government and the establishment of the Islamic regime in Iran, there was actually a lot of freedoms granted to women. And it was a very liberal country. Not as liberal as we would think about it in terms of, you know, the West, where liberalism means beating the crap out of anyone who disagrees with you. Liberal in more the traditional sense, where they were actually allowed to have freedoms of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of, thought, speech, all the good stuff. And that completely disappeared when the regime took over. Now, it was just kind of like a mini Turkey in a way, where Turkey was a very liberal government under Ataturk, and Turkey was one of the first countries that gave women the right to vote, way before America ever did. In fact, it was considered a PR coup when Turkey congratulated America on finally modernizing and allowing its women to vote. Yeah, it's kind of weird to think about women in Iran being allowed to wear bikinis and show off their bodies and, be beautiful without covering up their entire face. Well, over the decades, the Iranian regime has held on the power with an iron grip and has financed many, many terrorist organizations to attack, like Saudi Arabia, for example. Pakistan does that too, but Iran definitely funds a lot of terrorist organizations and has them attack allies of the West all the time. Now, the biggest controversy with Iran is it seems like everyone in politics wants to overthrow the Iranian regime. They want to bomb Iran, send in a bunch of troops, completely decimate the country, and bring it under compliance, and then set up a democracy there, like we did in Afghanistan. And since Iran is so close to Pakistan, who Pakistan does have nukes, it seemed as like kind of a dicey proposition, and people are just so sick of these wars being instigated by the United States that there's been huge pushback around actually invading the country. People see it as a completely pointless endeavor and want nothing to do with it. Not that they don't support the Iranians protesting and trying to overthrow the government. It's just that Americans don't want to be involved in trying to help overthrow the government. They want the people to do it themselves. And the reason for that is kind of obvious if you really think about it. Because in Afghanistan, we overthrew the government, instituted a democracy, and then poorly managed the country for years. And the country couldn't manage itself. And the reason is that a lot of people within the country just didn't want a democracy. And they felt like they were being oppressed by being forced to participate in one. Therefore, we as Americans have decided as a collective whole that invading other countries and trying to implement more cultural standards upon them is a complete waste of time and energy. Now, in terms of Iran, I'm not really sure how true that would be, because you gotta remember, in countries like Afghanistan and Iran, is that there was democracies there at one point. There was freedom of expression, freedom of thought, freedom of religion in those countries. You know, women allowed to wear bikinis and show off their bodies. Like, equal rights for all, basically. So, to settle on the idea that all of these countries are just filled with backwater savages unable to adapt to a modern society is a little bit crazy to think about, because these countries were modern societies 40 or 50 years ago. Now, it's kind of hard for me to really talk too much on this, because the newer generations obviously fully believe in Sharia law because they've been raised to think that way. And there were older generations that always believed in it. So nowadays, it's kind of hard to tell whether or not a democracy would work in these countries, because the reason why those democracies were overthrown in the first place is because enough people wanted Sharia law inside of them and had the power and force to basically enact those policies without anyone being able to stop them. So the American perspective is just sit back, watch what happens, and let's see if they have the ability and the drive to overthrow these regimes and enact a democracy without our help. And the reason why a lot of politicians would rather invade and implement the democracy ourselves is because we want the people who desire that style of government to be in our debt and to become permanent trading partners for us. People that we can basically hold over the coals and say, hey, you owe your existence, your government to us. Therefore, you should give us a good deal in trade and selling us a good portion of your oil. And we have found over the years that that's a very ineffective way to run foreign policy. That while we would hope that these people would be in our debt and therefore give us a better trade deal, what usually happens is that these people see us invading as being an outside third party that has no business being in their politics in the first place, and they grow bitter and jaded and angry towards us. Whereas if their own people does everything on their own, they'll see it as an internal matter and not blame the United States for their suffering. Whereas if we are involved, they will treat us as foreign invaders and do everything in their power to destroy anything we want set up for them. And I kind of agree with that. I do agree with that. That we can't just go in, wipe out the current leadership, and then just set up basically our own little colony there. Not because I don't think democracies or republics are good things, but that the most likely outcome is them just hating us and fighting against us every step of the way, every little change we try to implement. So it is better to try not to guide them openly anyways, and try to, like, you know, allow them the opportunity to do things on their own. So, I don't know. I think it is for the best if the Iranian regime goes away, but the United States really shouldn't be directly involved with it. It should be a matter of the people to decide, not us. I mean, that's all I really have to say on the matter. I just feel like I should say something about it. And, well, yeah, I guess I'll leave it there, guys. That's my personal opinion, so I'll talk to you all later. Bye.